And I'd like to welcome you to our new reading group. We're starting out the reading group with a discussion of syllabi on multiple levels as an overarching framework for incorporating ideas relating to diversity, and also as a preview of what's to come in future meetings. We want to get your input and establish this as a collaborative effort from the very beginning. In addition, a syllabus is a very practical part of teaching and something that we can easily adjust, even just a little bit each year. We don't have to try to change everything all at once and get so overwhelmed that it's hard to change anything. We can change as much as we're able to each time and consider it a work in progress, maybe a lifelong work in progress as we ourselves grow together with our students. Critically, also, a syllabus is often our first communication with students. It can be our first communication before we actually meet our students and a factor in whether or not they take our courses. When students read a course syllabus, they're not just wondering which textbook should I buy and when is the midterm. They're also wondering, what is this instructor like? Do I belong here? Can I succeed in this course? Will my needs be met? Is this a course where I can feel welcome? And maybe even, is this a field where I can feel welcome? Through our syllabi, we can impact and shape both directly and subliminally how students perceive answers to these questions. We can impact whether or not students feel empowered to face challenges or daunted from the start. If they feel a sense of inclusion and belonging, even as many choose Russian as an exotic or unusual language, or a sense of exclusion, or maybe even imposter syndrome. A syllabus gives students their first impression about who we are as instructors, what we value, and what they can expect us to value about them and offer them. Syllabi often emphasize avoiding conflicts, but they can also showcase our classrooms as collaborative and empathetic spaces that we're creating together. It can show them the extent to which we care to try to understand where they're coming from, to meet them where they are with both their strengths and their weaknesses, and to help them grow their strengths and to broaden their perspectives, not only in specific academic skills, but also as people, because after all, we work in the humanities. And critically for the humanities, a syllabus can showcase to students how diversity exists in any world, their own world, Russophone world or otherwise, and why this diversity matters. We're very fortunate to have as our first author in this reading group, Tom Garza, an expert and innovator in language pedagogy and cultural studies, and an absolute pro at meeting students where they are, helping them explore the diversity that each has within themselves and developing their appreciation for diversity among others. As Tom speaks, I'd like for you to consider some overarching questions that he and I discussed when planning this event. One, what steps can be taken immediately to increase inclusion and diversity in the courses you teach and in the way you present them in your syllabi? We'll put these in the chat. Two, how do you understand the phrase decolonize as applied to your curricula, courses, and syllabi? And three, how can we move from covering texts or materials in our classes to interrogating or challenging them? How can we reflect this in our syllabi? So I'll turn the floor now to Tom and post those questions in the chat.
Susan, thank you so much. Those were just wonderfully appropriate and I think very nicely framing introductory remarks. So thank you for those, and thank you for the invitation to kind of inaugurate this incredible initiative you had of putting together something a little more informal in terms of how we're discussing these issues of diversity, inclusivity, equity, access, all of these wonderful issues that have come up really to the fore of academic and global discussion in the last 2 years plus. and give us a chance not to have to say we're part of a particular committee or we're doing this in camera, but rather something that's just a lot more personal that we can do. Also, kind of like what you were saying, like our own syllabi, we want to make these discussions as welcoming as possible. So let me just dive right in. I'm going to share my screen very quickly here. Let me get my PowerPoint up and running for everyone. There we go. Just really a little introduction to the to the article itself, that the same title here, there, and elsewhere, playing around a little bit with Tuck and Yang's 2012 seminal piece. Decolonization is not an and, it is an elsewhere. The idea that we're not just looking at tacking on items to a syllabus or to a curriculum, but rather really looking to find a different place for discussion, not a place that is in the locus of the power brokers, as they were, or the locus only of our intersectional students, but an elsewhere where all of us can come together to discuss these issues. That's where I'm coming from. And I want to also thank you all so much for taking this time on a Friday afternoon toward the end for most of us of our academic semesters. But in general, just at the end on a Friday is always just so, I know, such a time that you want to keep for your own use, and especially for taking the time to read through the piece that was included, this name here, there, and elsewhere, in Russian language journal, this past issue that Colleen Lucy so beautifully put together and edited for the American Council of Teachers of Russian. Let me dive right into this discussion. So Susan alluded to this, actually referred directly to this idea of decolonizing the syllabus, and asked it to be one of the questions you think about as I make these brief opening remarks before we get into our discussion of the piece and of your own syllabi. It's a funny, a tough word. I've equated it in the last few talks that I've given over the last months. It's a somewhat unfortunate term, decolonize. It kind of falls right into the same bracket as defund in defund the police. It's very well intentioned, but has been so weaponized by a number of groups and individuals to have as negative as possible a connotation as it could. What is not decolonize mean in this case, in decolonizing the syllabus, is replacing and eradicating. It is not talking about becoming less inclusive. It is not talking about being exclusive, throwing out texts, throwing out entire approaches, but rather thinking critically about the works that we teach, the way that we teach them. That's a really important part of thinking about decolonization, is not just changing up, mixing up what we're putting out as texts that we read and consider, but actually how we go about looking at those. Are we putting them out there as, oh yes, the loaded word, canonical? Are they part of a larger canon? Or are we trying in many ways to push back, interrupt the centuries-old canon, to think more critically about why it is that we valorize certain works over others? What we're looking at really in decolonization is not tokenism. It's not about simply, or as Tuck and Yang call it, fetishization, not saying, well, I'm going to include this author or this work, there I've decolonized, but rather a much more global, critical way of looking at the entirety of the syllabus from the beginning. Again, as Susan said, the first words, if you put at the very top of your syllabus your name or the name of the course, you're already privileging information about what is important to you, to your students. If you start off with the very first thing at the top of either the website or the page being the words welcome, you suddenly have changed the entire timbre of both the syllabus and the course itself, just adding that one word. And from there on, we go. If you read through the article, I gave you some suggestions of just some simple ways that in shifting style and lexicon, you can actually change the timbre of the entire course. Now, once we can get past this idea that decolonization does not simply mean let's not teach this, but rather teach that, but instead a kind of amalgam of that idea, we can start to look at our own field a little bit and think about, well, what has been especially if we're looking at post-secondary, although the topicality here applies as much if you read through the K through 16 standards, the newly revised standards, the questions about what constitutes what we so commonly call through the 90s and 2000s big C culture, Tolstoyevsky, the big boys, the big privileged white men of Russian literature as kind of symbolic of the greater canon of Russian literature. Is there any way that we can not throw out Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, but rather make the teaching of those canonical courses, 19th century survey, 20th century survey, to make them more welcoming, inclusive, and diverse? I contend that the answer to those questions is a resounding yes, and I'm hoping that in the next little bit, in the time we have today, we might get some ideas of how that can be done. I wanted to put up one example that I realize my own, there we go. There we are. Being able to see all your wonderful faces, I was realizing I'm covering up part of my slides for myself here. I put this in the article itself, but I wanted to give you just a little bit of a bit more discussion, a minute or so, just of what was involved in decolonizing this area studies. It's a mixture of, it really is interdisciplinary, part literary, part filmic studies, and part political studies course that I designed back in 2008 at the height of the Chechen Wars with Russia, called Chechnya 360, People, Politics, and Power. And at the core of the course, of course, were the big boys. I mean, they are the literary works that frame this, the question of how do Russians see the Caucasus, and the Northern Caucasus in particular. I borrowed heavily from the works of especially the poetic works of Pushkin, including his the first version of Kafkaysky Plennik, which then becomes the basis of Tolstoy's more expanded work. Lermontov, in his remarkable association with the Northern Caucasus, literally having a love story being told, like Tolstoy's Tsigany, Lermontov's Valerik, and of course, Hero of Our Times, the Geroi Нашего Времени, all of these pieces speak so much to how it is that Russian eyes looked upon the region, the individuals, the cultures, and the relationships they had with Russians. Tolstoy probably the most prominent in terms of writing entire short novels on the piece, which our students find, like Geroi Нашего Времени, finding even in 2022, incredibly relevant and poignant. Both the Cossacks and especially, I think, Haji Murat, his very last full piece, really resonate with the Gen Z students that we had. Toward the mid-teens of when I taught the course back before in 2015, 2016, I added some more contemporary Russian voices, Andrei Gerasimov, Zakhar Prilepin, again, two very, very different kind of voices, Gerasimov being much of the left, the more his novel called Thirst, about a wounded Chechen war veteran trying to reconstitute his life in back home in Russia after the war, only to become a hardcore alcoholic, and the being able to deal with his own trauma only through alcohol, really remarkable. And then Zakhar Prilepin, whose right-wing politics give a real different lens through which one can look at these works. But if you look at this screen, it is still all male, all white, all from positions of, in their own way, Russian power. So the course really is still, even in 2016, was still quite monolithic. Finally, in recalibrating the course, trying to decolonize it, I introduced a number of Chechen perspectives on Russia in the course, such as Terloyev. I'm going from the left side to the right here. Maria Terloyeva's incredible piece called Dancer Among the Ruins, Bisultanov's both prose and poetry, and Saduleyev's remarkable autobiography called simply Yeah, Chechenets, that is just mind-blowingly wonderful, and available, all of these works available in both Russian and in English, so that because the course itself is taught in English, but with readings available for majors in Russian. So this helped greatly in getting the course now moving more toward finding that elsewhere by introducing these different voices, just in terms of positionality, Chechen voices looking at Russians rather than the other way around, and also more gender diversity, getting some of the first women authors into the course. Women were easier to integrate, as well as were intersectional identities by introducing certain filmic works. Back in 2004, this is now on the right side of the screen, Three Rooms of Melancholia, incredible, incredible Finnish lesbian director Piro Hankasala put out this just poignant three-piece documentary on mostly the lives of women and children, but with a through line of how men created these three rooms for the orphans, as she called them, of Chechnya during the end of the first, beginning of the Second War. Anna Nemzer's incredible film by Vojna i Mirnaya that my students found just mind-blowingly profound. And the piece, the HBO piece that almost everyone has seen now, the documentary again called Welcome to Chechnya, based on on horrific treatment of the LGBTQ plus community in the Northern Caucasus by Ramzan Kadyrov and company, and the Kadyrovtsi in finding them, jailing them, in many cases torturing or killing members of that community. So now a real syllabus of diversity now has been created, and the course becomes very different, as it does actually in terms of its name. It became much more a course in looking at how trauma is treated in a region by looking at it through different intersectional lenses. You can also, as I've mentioned in the article, create intersectional courses that specifically tie together our region and a marginalized group in your own area. At the University of Texas, obviously our largest community of underrepresented individuals, soon to be actually a majority population, are the Latinx community, mostly Mexican American. And so I've added a course, this became available about 5 years ago, Mexican American masculinities and men in popular cultures in Russia and in Mexico, to try to, again, to address the issue of decolonization of what we think of as a more canonical series of courses, not just in one syllabus, but instead in an entire curriculum. So lastly, before we start, and this is a way I want to kick us into our discussion, to think about now, and I know that for most of us we're ending our courses, but if we can think ahead, use this summer to think about reimagining, reframing, decolonizing our courses before we start them up again in late August, early September, is some things you can do at looking at your courses, the materials you use, and most importantly, the core piece, the syllabus, the piece that your students will receive either in hard or in digital form from you, that in so many ways, as Susan said at the very beginning, it tells the student from day one, what's this going to be like for me as an individual and as part of my larger a frame of study while I'm at University of or at School X. So things like looking over your textbooks, the materials, whatever you're using to teach from, and really look at them critically. Don't simply look at how much is it going to cost the students. Obviously, that's important. How available is it, and so forth. All of those important things, but really look at them critically in terms of what's in it. Who's represented in our textbooks? Look at the faces there. Look at the texts that are included. Are they representative? Can they speak to the diversity of students that are in your classroom? And what are the modes of presentation? Are they all talking at us, telling us this is how it is? Or do they give the options, the possibility to find that elsewhere and allow us, our texts, and our students to have a conversation with each other? Ask or poll your students ahead of time before the beginning of the semester, and this is true for K through 16, and ask them about things like their identity preferences. I know there are some FERPA considerations here, especially for pre-college students, but to what way you can do this, check with your school districts, check with your own universities. University of Texas, which is quite conservative in its interpretation of FERPA, actually has no problems with us asking things like, what pronoun would you prefer me to use with you in the classroom? So you don't need to reveal so much about your own gender identity, but by revealing pronoun, you can at least help me as instructor make sure that you're included and welcome in my class. And finally, consider revising assignments, supplementary materials, the entire syllabus itself for inclusivity and diversity. Think again about who's in your classroom. Also think about how to attract those students we're not getting in our classrooms now by making syllabi that are more inclusive and diverse. And by doing all of that, we hopefully will not only have more diverse, decolonized courses, but an entire, much more decolonized profession. With that, I want us to move through, everyone through there, thank you all, just for some introductory remarks about the piece, to talk more with each other in some groups. I know that Susan has arranged some questions for us to be thinking about already, and we'll take our conversation and facilitate those conversations with a group of us here on screen right now.
Thank you so much, Tom. I can say students love it when you write to them in the summer and you ask them, what are you interested in? Why are you taking Russian? And we can easily slip in questions about their identity preferences and anything having to do with diversity. As we invite them to fall open houses, for example. I wonder, Tom, you were perfect with your timing. So I wonder if anyone, if maybe there are one or two brief questions specifically to Tom before we go out into the breakout groups.
Please, I would love to get any, it doesn't have to be question, it could be comment, pushback, anything, please.
And while we're doing this, could I ask one of the people who know the technology of all this to set up the breakout groups? That would really be fabulous.
I'm on it, Susan, but
I know you are.
A couple of questions.
Thank you.
Of questions. Do you want 4 people in the room? Fewer? More?
That's
so there are 5.
There are 5.
We need 5 rooms, Edina, because there's 5 facilitators.
5. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah. But any comments, questions?
Tom, I have a question. If no one else is giving one, I'll take the microphone. I am sorry I was a little late because I had trouble getting on, but I'm so delighted that you organized this and are starting the conversation. I read your article and was interested in it, of course, and I think it's so timely that we're doing this in a formal way. I happened to be at a meeting a couple weeks ago, and we were, the discussion was about presenting something to incoming students who are, potentially joining our university, they're applicants, candidates day type thing.
Right.
And they wanted to have a demonstration class. And there was a comment that we definitely needed a non-imperialistic language. So
good luck with that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, exactly. And oddly enough, some of the options were supposedly Japanese, Chinese, Arabic, and as your response already shows, it's kind of a ludicrous endeavor to find a non-imperialistic language. But the idea of and you talk about this at length in your article, the decolonizing language instruction is part of decolonizing the people who speak it, the context in which we speak, all of us. And what would you have said? I objected to the notion of trying to find a non-imperialistic language, but I was shouted down.
Mary, what a terrific anecdote, and with your permission, I may use that again actually at our final faculty meeting coming up tomorrow, a Zoom meeting, kind of an end of the year thing. That's going to be a fun thing to bring up because, I've been following for the last 2 years now John Lewis's parting words of making good trouble as much as I can, and I think I had heard such a ludicrous suggestion. And said, especially if it was coming from someone like my dean, would be absolutely to push back and say, perfect, then let's do Quechua, let's do Mayan, let's do a language that itself has been marginalized by colony and by empire. but has somehow managed to hold on to being its own self, with its own culture, with its own even literary traditions in languages that are very marginalized. I mean, it would be very tongue-in-cheek to do that, because honestly, languages that we think of as world languages that are not part of colony go into that. I'm trying to remember what was the term. I think it was Ben Rifkin who came up with the not lictals, not the less commonly taught, but the really super duper uncommonly taught, or something like that. Languages that simply are so incredibly marginalized that they, in a way, are on the periphery of empire. But wow, yeah, that's a shame. That it, I think it would have been much more useful, your initial reflex to say no, embrace it, and go with a language like, I mean, pick, if you will, pick Arabic, pick Chinese, pick Russian, but to be very cognizant and be forthcoming about its place as both a world language, but also as an imperial language. That it it's part of what made in the Soviet days, uh, what was it? All the various little nomenclature that were given to the Soviet Union as the most, многонациональная страна,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
right. All of those wonderful terms came from empire, right? It all comes from acquisition of indigenous land. So yeah.
Well, and some of the most interesting literature being written, films being made,
Yeah.
are productions in the so-called imperialist languages, but done by marginalized groups. So
Yeah.
it's absurd to, it's worse than absurd. It's very damaging to exclude any language.
Indeed.
That's my comment.
And there that last phrase was perfect. Let's not exclude. Let's not exclude.
Yeah,
Right?
there we go. How about that? Well, thank you.
Thank you. It's good to see you again, Mary. It's been too many years.
So no, I think I think we're ready to go into breakout groups. That was a perfect amount of question time, because I just posted the Google Docs. I had time to post all the Google Docs for the 5 groups. What I'd like for you to do is to consider first the 3 questions, A1, A2, and A3 that I posted in the chat, which I believe you'll be able to see once you're in your groups, in the light of Tom's presentation. And then I would suggest a group brainstorming for this initial meeting, setting a collaborative tone, and also thinking about using the ACTR spirit of brainstorming and sharing resources and sharing ideas. It's such a wonderful part of this organization. So I've set up a Google Doc, and I'd like for you to include some tips or ideas that you have. For example, how specifically do you promote greater diversity? How do you find more diverse images? If you look, in for even something like Malak, well, whatever it might be, a word in Russian, you're not going to get a very diverse group of people in images off of Google, at least. So, and any sources that you have, or any films, any songs, any leveraging student presentations, guest speakers. How do you find guest speakers from more diverse areas, extracurriculars, community engagement, expanding the canonical view of vocabulary, stylistics, and so on? What are your ideas about this, and how can we brainstorm together? And that will then influence what we do in future meetings of this group. So I suggest that we go for 15 minutes to the breakout groups, and each of you choose a scribe for your group. Each group will have a facilitator mostly from the ACTR Diversity Committee. And we'll come back, let's say at 3:18, and have a group discussion of what everybody came up with. Irina, are we ready to go into breakout groups?
Susan? I think so, except for there are comments that someone cannot access Google Doc.
Yeah, I think the permissions might need to be changed. Right now, you have to be logged in or request access.
Yeah, I think none of the docs are accessible.
I see.
I accessed my doc. I'm not wondering if they're accessible to us, but not to the full group. If you change the permissions to anyone with a link. I'm having trouble. I don't see where my breakout rooms are. Are those because they haven't been set up yet, Irina, or is that something?
I
you
haven't
can
opened
like-
them yet,
Okay.
Okay.
but you can
I-
see the list of people for each group in the chat.
I believe that the breakout group facilitators have access to the Google Doc. So maybe the facilitators could be the one to be in charge of the Google Doc so that we can get going. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Perfect. Mhm.
All
All
right,
right. So I think we're ready for the breakout groups. Thank you so much, Irina.
Thanks, Irina.
they're open now. Hi, Dan. You go to group 4. if
I
you
see.
would like.
I have to dive this minute to a 6 o'clock event. I just wanted to apologize. I will be listening to the recorded version going forward, but that was a hell of a great start, wasn't it? It was a great
was.
start. Thanks.
It
Thanks
was.
for what you're doing.
Sure. All right. Enjoy
Bye-bye.
the event. Bye-bye.
Mute. People will be coming back from the breakout groups. So Mark, I didn't understand which of us is speaking.
I think you boldly ceded the authority to me, Susan.
Okay, good. I'll be brave with that.
Hope you don't regret it.
Never have yet. All right, so looks like we have everyone back. And let's start out with group one. If you could share some of your ideas. And if we could keep this just to a minute each, that would be fantastic. I know it's very hard. I will compile the ideas that were written down and email them to all of you. So group one.
Susan, are you expecting the facilitators to comment or someone from the group? I didn't make a speaker.
Someone else.
As you choose.
So is anyone from group one want to speak? I don't want to call anyone out.
How about if we start with group five and be a little bit more diverse and not go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Mark.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I will try to be short. One overarching theme I thought in the comments of the teachers who spoke in our group was how inspiring assignments that do address diversity are, and how motivating they seem to have been for the students and the experience of our teachers. Discussions range from fairly simple but effective assignments at the beginning level, such as listing all of the ethnicities, nationalities to be found in the Russian Federation, and as an assignment, asking students to bring to class information about one of those various ethnicities, all the way to more advanced kinds of activities, such as using Zoom to interview and actually interact and maybe even bargain with the real estate agents from different parts of the Russian Federation, including those where ethnic Russians are not a significant a presence, all the way to highly advanced classes where discussion of a theme like immigration in a cultural perspective, comparing the Canadian, US, European, and Russian and Ukrainian practices so far as immigration and ex-migration are concerned, and what that can reveal. Another sort of keynote here was the surprise and wonder that many students discovered upon learning that actually Russian is, in terms of its speakers, a more decentralized language than traditional views might lead us to believe.
Certainly the choice of topics can inherently encourage a sense of diversity and discussion of diversity and diverse perspectives. Group 4.
Okay, that's us. I don't know. I might talk I can say a few things, but maybe Maria or Masha or maybe Jason wants to join in. So we did one thing. We spent a lot of time talking about something that we thought wasn't addressed in the article. It's the issue of grading, right? And creating a grading, not just syllabus, not only the material, changing the material, but what do we do with grading in order to make sure that it takes into consideration equity and also inclusion. And we just talked about several different ways how we can do this. We can go through, do gradeless assessments, or we can use specs grading, maybe just use gamification principles in our courses, offer more individual assignments, and also even reconsider how we have to redesign our syllabi since the pandemic, because it's no longer with all these things that we've learned about our students, our learners during the pandemic. We realized that it's our participation and deadlines and other things that we used to do. They are no longer address all this diversity of our students and their situations, right? Personal situations, learning situations, etc. So more choices of assignments and give them opportunities for tokens, additional grading opportunities, grade opportunities. We also talked briefly about how we need to also decolonize administrative roadblocks to curriculum redesigns and updates and revisions, because even if we are ready to do these things quickly, university administration usually is very strict, and you cannot just change something quickly in courses. They will say you have to submit the whole proposal, a new proposal, and it's usually a year in advance, and it requires so much bureaucracy and paperwork. So it can discourage teachers and instructors to even take this path, because administration is not supportive. So Masha or Jason, do you want to mention something else?
I think, Olga, you summarized the key things, but I think that's something for all of us to think about, especially in response to the war. I think each and every of us is doing something to address it, but yet my syllabus is still Introduction to the Classics of Russian Literature. And it might take up to 2 years to change the title and the description, even though I will be remapping it completely. I think, Jason, you talked about student-driven curriculum planning. You want to share that?
Just there was perhaps just one way around this question. We'll see. Maybe Tom has some thoughts about getting a lot more student input into the actual course design and content, and which directions that it can go in. Actually getting their feedback about, well, which works would you like to do? Which topics would you like to do? And I know there are various ways we could approach that.
I couldn't agree more, Jason. I popped into the chat just a one-liner there. There's a separate piece that I did. Also, I think also an RLJ in the COVID issue, as it was called, in writing about how to do pedagogy in the age of COVID. Project-based instruction, or project-based assessment, I should say, which is very heavily student-centered. It really is their ideas, their design of the project itself, is a really terrific way of, if you will, decolonizing assessment, decolonizing grading. That is not saying, I'm only going to grade you on the following descriptors or following items of things we're so used to doing. I find in language classes, it's so liberating for instructors as well as for students to move, quizzes that still have to give us the usual kind of vocab checks or grammar checks or whatever you still think are needed to help you know where your students are in the class. But when you get to actually getting those assignments that are going to be, that the student has to carry with them through the rest of their training, the kind of things where they're designing their own projects stick with them for a long time. So there's just putting that out there for anyone. If anyone's interested, DM me or send me an email, and I'll happily at length set up a separate meeting. We can talk about project-based assessment. Okay.
All right, let's move on to group 6. I believe there was a group 6 maybe with Irina.
Yep. Anyone from group 6?
We spent a lot of time talking about the syllabus, and I think everyone in the group was struck by Tom's presentation of the old syllabus and the revamped syllabus, and it sort of segues right out of what you were just saying. We need to be more welcoming. We need to rewrite our descriptions of what they're going to do to make it clear that we're welcoming, and we need to include all kinds of welcome signals to all kinds of different groups, and actually constantly be trying to modify what we offer to make sure that we're hitting all sorts of needs from people that maybe we've unwittingly marginalized. For example, several of us had to think about how to deal with the issue of heritage students who, seem like they have an advantage, but actually have some disadvantages. And then the non-heritage speaking students who feel like they're at a disadvantage from the beginning, but actually have their own secret powers. And, you know, I've had disabled students and they forced me to realize that I've never once made a PowerPoint until I had this student a few years ago, and had never once made a PowerPoint with an image of just a casual disabled student going about his or her day learning Russian. And we need to broaden and diversify everything we teach, and where are we going to get all that stuff. I personally have gotten a lot from writers from the former Soviet Union, the former republics that are now countries, because a lot of them are still very creative writers, artists, musicians using Russian, but giving a different approach, not a imperial approach. And so I think that's one way to do it. But I just jumped in so that we wouldn't have dead silence, but other people in the group can remind me what I forgot. It was, how can there's so much more than 15 minutes or however long we had. We need more discussion. Raquel, I'm looking at, you're just on my screen. What did I leave out? Or Katya?
No, I think you covered everything really well. And I think what struck me is, how I like to see myself as a welcoming instructor, and yet my syllabi don't always reflect that. So what Tom presented in the article, the two different types of syllabi, and having to, admit that a lot of what I've done in the past really represents the ones that aren't quite so welcoming. So it was a lot of food for thought, So no, I think you covered everything very well.
Maybe we'll go on to group 3 then. 3, 2, and 1. How does that sound?
Sure. Tom asked me if I could speak for a group, but I know not everyone in our group got an opportunity to necessarily talk. So please add on to anything I said, or if you have something that you want to still reflect upon. We talked briefly about pronouns and how if you haven't asked students for that, a lot of younger students and Gen Z students are okay and comfortable and kind of oftentimes expect to be or anticipate to be asked in class, and that there's also a really great opportunity there for dialogue of different ways to express identity and vocabulary opportunities to study. We also mentioned, I think one of the first groups who reported out, nationalities, and how, especially for some of us who aren't native speakers, sometimes we encounter nationalities or things like that we actually don't know the vocabulary for. We might not know it off the top of our head. Sri Lankan, or I teach at Howard, so African countries. I admit, as not a native speaker, that's a challenge for me on the spot sometimes. But also another strategy is in my lit classes, I lead with a welcome on the syllabus, but also how important studying literature and great works of literature is to participating fully in democracy. So that's some of the stuff we talked about as a group.
Wonderful. Group 2.
Could before we go on, Kelly, could you repeat what you said about democracy? I think I missed that point.
Sure, because we got cut off at that moment when I was talking, I didn't want to seem like I was a rambler, especially to my group. But I have my syllabus right here, so I can just read the language. One of the reasons you are encouraged to study literature as part of your degree requirements is so that you will be able to more fully participate in our democracy by understanding more fully and deeply how the ideas and expressions happening all the time in all sorts of media are rooted in generations long, complex, and often very beautiful and moving conversations. So, yeah.
Would you copy that into the chat? That was just beautiful. Would you mind?
Sure thing. Sure thing.
Let's give Kelly a standing ovation. I'd like.
I have to credit my students at Howard. They have truly challenged me to
Wow.
think this way. Yeah. Thank you, guys.
That's the best kind of teaching.
Yeah.
So group 2.
Is anyone from group 2 who wants to speak? Okay, I probably, oh, Christian, yeah, please.
You can go ahead and do it. I was going to break the silence if nobody was going to say anything, but feel free, please.
Well, I can start, and after that, please feel free to add, because we had a wonderful conversation. I think, like, I agree with Mary, 15 minutes is not enough, definitely. So we talked about actually a lot about the role of visual component in the courses and how it's important to to catch students' attention with first images that they see in the materials, and it can be in syllabi or in the textbooks, especially for the first year students who come and they open the textbook and they don't see represented. So also the textbook colonialism. So in general, we talked how important to change the materials that we work with, and that especially I appreciated one of the ideas that our students now, Gen Z students, they come with strong understanding of their identity, and we should consider it redesigning our materials or bringing new topics, because sometimes they feel more confidence in discussing like certain topics than we think. And it's very important to go along with our students and maybe even one step ahead and give them more freedom to express themselves. Also, I think, Christine, it's your time to join, because you brought wonderful examples how you diversify your materials. Maybe you can share it here too, if you don't mind.
Well, I've been revising my first year materials this year and really trying to focus, while I'm still teaching Russian culture, trying to infuse the course with the culture of the different peoples from the autonomous republics in Russia, so that, you know, the students can see, they hear about the diversity of Russia, but then, you know, to see that culturally. And I've just been throwing things in as where they fit, instead of trying to have, you know, this is the day we shall talk about, you know, Tatarstan. I throw things in. So for example, in when they learn the verb piet for the first time in first year, we watch Tuvan throat singing and learn about that and how that fits into the Tuvan culture. And just, you know, we just finished a chapter on food, and we looked a lot at the different cuisines of different areas of Russia. And so the students have really, really liked it a lot. And I have a very diverse population because I teach at a community college. I'm at Portland Community College in Portland, Oregon. And so I felt a real need to make sure that the classes and what we're learning reflects the students who are in my classroom. And they've been really receptive to that. So and it's been great for me too, because I've learned so much about the other cultures of the autonomous republics. So
If I could just say one thing, Christine, thank you for raising that. It was beautifully expressed. I just put in the chat a sort of short version of this slightly more elaborate bit. As a Texas Mexican, I cannot tell you how tiring it is to grow up or to be constantly exposed to what everyone else thinks a Mexican is. I grew up with Speedy Gonzalez, with the Frito Bandito, with Chico and the Man. I was so tired of everyone thinking I should own a sombrero serape and have a mustache. If we continue to think of the Dutch as little wooden-shoed children, that Ukrainians always have flowers in their hair, that everyone in Siberia is always with bieli mitid next to them and so forth. We are not doing service to intersectionality and diversity. And so I love your idea of really honestly incorporating the multicultural side of things in an honest way, such as I love that idea of, you know, Pietz is not simply going to be a Russian church choir, but rather Tuvan throat singers. Terrific. Just a terrific example. Thank you for that.
thank you.
And very motivating from students, for students. Very engaging for them. Number 1.
Okay, we also focused a lot on images. We started off with the idea of content and how that might be similar. We asked that question, should it be similar or different for language-based courses versus literature or culture courses? And then we kind of came to the conclusion that we actually have to be very significantly intentional in the content, particularly because we're often using textbooks that aren't necessarily diverse in their representations. And so we need to enhance the images that people see. We talked about the use of images or even video, even when the speech is not comprehensible, to be able to use to describe the images that you're seeing. We talked about the importance of showing a diversity of images. So when you show, for example, when you're talking about house, that you show a great variety of ways that people live in different places. We had one really interesting comment about how you can use images to debunk some myths and preconceptions that students come with. One of the people in my group talked about how he shows images and just asks, "Esta Russia?" And then they're supposed to guess, "Dai linia." And often, you know, a lot of the images are Russia and not things that they would recognize. So that kind of idea of moving from content to mindset development. We didn't talk about, but we said, are we talking about the diversity of Russia or the Russophone world? We did not have time to explore that. And I think that is an interesting comment to come back to at a future time, particularly with the situation in Ukraine and what Russophone means. And I think that would be an interesting topic for conversation. We talked about using video in very much the same way, and they don't need to understand all the language. But especially of authentic situations, authentic cooking, authentic going to religious ceremonies, authentic scenes from real life. There was a great, one of our participants talked about hiring young people actually in the different regions of the Russian Federation to shoot videos of authentic life, and how, you know, there was a statement that it's not as professionally done, but then there was a consensus of the group that often students love that it's young people, it feels real, it is indeed real, and how that could also be helping people, and how that is also difficult with the current political situation, but just that as a concept. And we had the statement that we would like to return to a conversation of pronouns, and perhaps started by some articles, because we do want to respect our students who use non-binary forms of address in English, and what are our different strategies for doing that in the Russian classroom.
Brilliant.
So did I get everything? I'm sorry if I left anything out. I found it hard to take notes and listen, and I forgot to take notes. And
It's okay, we have the recording. And I'll compile the notes and I'll listen to the recording. It might be June before I get to it, but send everybody this incredible brainstorming of ideas that we have. I think one common thread is that we need more time, longer breakout groups. So we'll definitely keep that in mind in planning the next. Tom, do you have any closing remarks that you might want to make?
Wow, so many, so I won't make them all, I promise. But let me first, I kind of start where I began, and that is my incredible sense of gratitude and thanks to you all for what you've done. And it just kind of showed me, when we talk about allyship, it's a subject that I'm very sensitive to, because it's always easy. I always joke it's easy to wear the pin, right, to wear the badge that says, yeah, count me in. It's another thing entirely when we actually ask you to do the work. And you all, by being here already, have shown your dedication to it, but the kinds of conversations you've had and the kinds of things you discussed or talking about, I love especially the things you had not made decisions on, the things that you're still ruminating, that you're still trying to come to some conclusions about, like the pronoun situation, like visuals, that you're still grappling with these things as an indication of a true ally. And I'm very, very touched by that. Our profession, for all that I'm so glad we're having this conversation, we're relatively late to the game. Slavic in particular came into getting into the whole DIA game a little bit later than a lot of the other parts of the humanities generally, and even other languages. So I'm delighted to see we're playing catch up in a very vigorous way. I would love to see things that are really practically based, around some of the readings we do in the future. I love the suggestion of looking at things like pronominal use. There are some incredibly good, as in excellently presented, but incredibly controversial pieces from that were done, have been done in Russia in the last, I think the first one appeared that I remember seeing anyway was about 8 years ago. It's in the early teens, on what to do. How do you describe yourself in pronominal use if you're non-binary? Yeah, so just so chuffed. You got my weekend started early by really coming into this feeling a bit tired after a semester that was not at all as engaging as I was hoping it would be. Our first semester fully face-to-face with students. It was really great to get this kind of energy from a group like all of you on a Friday afternoon on a subject that not enough people are taking seriously. So thank you all for that.
I think each of us can do a little bit at a time. We don't have to feel daunted that we have to do everything. There are a lot of ideas out there, and we can see how things go. Isa, did you have something that you wanted to say? Oh, was that clapping?
No, I just, yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Clapping's always fine. So maybe we could take a pulse. Should we meet again in the summer before classes start, or should we meet in September? What are people thinking? Maybe you could write in the chat when your ideal next meeting would be, and we'll keep that in mind for the when we're planning. And Tom, if you could just stay afterwards, maybe we'll just talk a little bit, Tom, and
Sure.
and Olga and Lee and Irina, if we could just talk for a moment, and anyone actually. Yeah,
You're getting a lot of support for summer in the chat there, Susan.
a lot of dedication here. A lot of dedication.
Very
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for coming and sharing part of your Friday afternoon with us. We loved being with you, and we're looking forward to continuing these conversations.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.